Hello everyone, this is Insta here. Welcome back to my Game of Thrones Season 9 fanfiction. We are on episode 6, we're halfway through, which I've called The Sins of the Father. It will take around 60 minutes. Last episode was the longest one we have up until now, and a lot of things happened, main things were in the Reach. Jaime, Podrick, Bronn, and the rest of the men were taken captive by the rebels. They're in the camp. They met the rebel leader Cadmus, who does his backstory about why he has a grudge against Daenerys. Jaime and the rest are announced they will be executed the next morning. Jon has returned to Winterfell because of some news he has received. Daenerys the mental state of Daenerys is just deteriorating totally when she heard that the Marine has fallen, that Varys has actually kept that information silent from her, and now he has been dismissed as a hand of the queen. Dario has returned, however. Gendry and Edric, they have arrived at King's Landing. Theon is still grieving over the loss of his wife, so everything pretty much is just going downhill. So I just suggest we jump right into episode 6, The Sins of the Father. The Reach. Jaime, Bronn, Podrick, and the other captives are brought to a small hill overlooking the rebel camp. Cadmus gives a short speech to his men about how they will end the reign of Daenerys. While the rebels are cheering, Cadmus brings forth his executioner. A soldier of Jaime gets picked out and is brought to the edge of the hill in full view of the rebels. Despite Jaime's pleading, the soldier is beheaded by the executioner and his body is pushed off the hill while everyone cheers. Another captive gets chosen and is brought to the same spot where this previous soldier was killed. Bronn is thinking about an escape, while Podrick and the other soldiers start to cry as they prepare for the end. After the third captive is beheaded, Podrick gets chosen and is brought to the spot. Jaime tries to calm him down from a distance, but it has no effect. From the moment the executioner wants to cut off Podrick's head, however, the ground starts to tremble. Everyone stops cheering as they feel the trembling getting more intense. Suddenly, the roar of a dragon can be heard as Cadmus turns himself around and sees Drogon coming at full speed. He warns the entire camp right before Daenerys orders Drogon to unleash fire on the entire camp. At that same moment, the whole army of Daenerys comes charging out of the woods and attacks the rebel camp. Cadmus orders everyone to fight back and defend the camp as a huge battle begins. Jaime, Bronn, Podrick, and the other captives manage to free themselves from the restraints and immerse themselves in the fight. Daenerys flies overhead and burns down all the tents and barracks. Cadmus' army is heavily outnumbered, but he refuses to surrender. Jaime, Bronn, and Podrick also fight several rebels as they try to reach the safety of Daenerys' army that's slowly surrounding the entire camp. Cadmus and several of his commanders kill many Starkgaryen soldiers. Jaime sees them from a distance and decides that he has to end this here and now. He, Bronn, and some other soldiers run up the hill where Cadmus and his men are. Cadmus lets his men form a defensive circle so that they can protect him. The men defending Cadmus get killed pretty quickly, however, as Jaime and his squadron attack. While the chaos ensues, a duel between Cadmus and Jaime breaks out. Daenerys keeps on burning every single rebel down that she sees. Jaime has clearly gotten better at fighting with his left hand, but Cadmus, however, forms a dangerous opponent. He kicks Jaime off the hill and violently starts swinging his battle axe at him as Jaime desperately tries to evade it. As Jaime gets pinned down and loses his sword, Cadmus stands before him. As he holds his axe high in the air to kill Jaime, he suddenly gets stabbed through his body with a spear by Podrick. Cadmus drops his axe, turns himself around, but then grabs Podrick and stabs him with the spear that was sticking out of him. Podrick falls on the ground. At that moment, Drogon unleashes fire again, narrowly missing Podrick. As a tree starts to collapse as it is struck by fire, Jaime sees it happening, then grabs Cadmus and pushes him right under the massive tree that crushes him to death as it falls on him. Jaime runs over to Podrick. Bronn also comes over and tries to take care of him by adding water to the wound, but it's too late, as Podrick dies soon afterwards. Jaime stands up and slowly looks around him. A couple of dozen rebels are surrendering to the Starkgaryen soldiers. Fire and destruction is everywhere as Drogon flies overhead with a vengeful Daenerys on his back. In Winterfell, Jon arrives back with his men and checks to see how little Sam is doing. He's informed by the Maester that he will recover from his sickness, and that it wasn't as severe as they first thought. Shortly after, Jon gets a raven by one of his men in which the victory over the rebels is mentioned. However, apparently the battle has caused a huge forest fire that led to several villages nearby getting completely destroyed. Jon tries to convince himself that it was an accident and that he must stay loyal to Daenerys, but this is not what he wanted. This is not what House Starkgaryen is meant to be. In King's Landing, Daenerys and her entire army arrives back. They march through the streets, but most of the civilians don't cheer this time. As a matter of fact, most of the civilians stay quiet. Tyrion watches as Daenerys enters the city. He informs her about the massive forest fire and the destructions of several small villages. Daenerys answers by saying that she had to show her enemies her full strength, and that in war there will always be casualties and sacrifices. Brienne has fully recovered from her injury, and watches the huge army that has gathered outside of the Red Keep. At this moment the entire Iron Fleet is docked in Blackwater Bay, the entire Baratheon army and all of the other bannermen have set up camp around the city. She is visited by Jaime, who wanted to check up on her. She is happy that he is okay, and asks after Podrick. Jaime sadly tells her that Podrick died while saving him. Brienne is clearly struck by this, and gets emotional. Not long after, a small funeral is held near the shores. Jaime, Brienne, Tyrion, Bronn, Varys and several others attend as they burn Podrick's body. Afterwards, Bronn and Tyrion have a proper reunion and walk back to the castle. Varys meets Edric, with who he also has a conversation about his past. Varys clearly tries to figure out if Edric is indeed who he says he is, but Edric's answers seem to suffice for now. Daenerys stands alone on her balcony as she watches the city and her army. She is visited by Tyrion, to whom she says that she doesn't understand the people. She gave them a great victory, and yet they still resent her. Tyrion tries to make her understand that she needs to be careful about crossing the line of being loved and being feared. She will be loved if she destroys their enemies, but if she does that by also destroying villages and killing innocents, she will be feared. During this conversation, Daenerys openly shows her frustrations and her fear. She has done everything in her power to be a good queen during the past year, but only a few missteps immediately caused her to lose the respect of the people. Tyrion understands her feelings, but again tries to make her understand that it's not too late, and that she needs to show the people that she hasn't lost her ways, that she is different in a good way. After Tyrion leaves, Daenerys looks down to the courtyard and sees Varys talking with several of her bannermen, causing her to think that he's plotting something against her. In Winterfell, Jon walks around in the Godswood, contemplating on how things are. He is visited by one of his advisors, who tells him that he shouldn't give Daenerys the freedom of giving their house a bad reputation. Jon is a child of ice and fire after all. He is as much the leader of his house as Daenerys is. Afterwards, he visits the maester of the castle with whom he has a similar conversation. He tells him that although she might indeed have a good heart, she is starting to follow the path that so many others before her have followed, and many of them did not end well. Jon is convinced that he must set things right and that he must try to help Daenerys, that he must go back to King's Landing with all his men and help Daenerys try to win back the love of the people before it's too late. In King's Landing, Gendry and Edric walk around the castle again and have a fun conversation. After a while, Edric, however, reveals that he has also been sold, like livestock, from one owner to another, and his childhood definitely wasn't easy. Yet now here he stands with his half-brother. Edric tells a dramatic story about himself, about what he had to endure in his life, how he has always been treated like some sort of a property or handicap, and that all he has ever wanted was to prove himself, prove that he isn't some disposable thing, but a man. And before he dies in this world, he will fight for those he cares about, or die trying. He might have lived mostly as a slave, but he is destined to die a good man who will be remembered by those who love him. Gendry hugs him and shows Edric that he has nothing to fear anymore. Daenerys visits Drogon, with whom she has a nice and relaxing moment. She notices how he is aching to stretch his wings, so she gives him permission to fly away, which he eventually does. She is then visited by Dario, with who she shares some fun memories of their past. Dario ends by saying that he will still remain loyal to her, making her happy. Afterwards, she goes back inside the castle. She tells Tyrion that she's going to visit the city and show herself among the people as one of them. She enters a stagecoach and departs to the city with several guards. Somewhere in one of the streets, she orders the stagecoach to stop, and she exits it. She's looked at by a lot of people. Some people smile at her, while a lot of people look angry. She decides to walk for a bit with the guards. She meets some children, with who she talks a bit, seemingly giving a good impression. After a while, she's met by several men who approach her. Apparently, these men knew people who were killed in a forest fire. She tries to talk with them, but they won't hear it and even start making threats. Then her guards step in and suggest that she goes back to the stagecoach. Suddenly, they find themselves being completely surrounded by men who take out knives. One of them attempts to cut Daenerys but immediately gets stabbed by one of the guards. This causes all of the men to attack Daenerys and her guards. The guards do their best to protect her, but they get picked off one by one. Daenerys starts to run away and the chase begins through the streets while she's screaming for help. Eventually, she gets cornered and tries to threaten them, but without success. They pin her down and attempt to rape her as Daenerys is screaming. Suddenly, one of them men gets impaled by a huge sword. It's Brienne who was secretly following them. The men attempt to attack Brienne, but she slashes every single one of them to death, alongside with Dario, who came with her to help. Daenerys lies on the ground with torn clothes and is shock. Brienne picks her up and carries her to safety as a bunch of other soldiers of the City Watch arrive. Daenerys is being carried by Brienne back to the Red Keep as she starts to cry. Alright, that was episode 6, The Sins of the Father. I think this was the most intense episode up until this point. This was a very character-driven, well, the second half is very character-driven, but the first half is of course very action-packed. It actually begins immediately with a huge battle at the rebel camp, and this battle you might have expected at the end of previous episode, but I thought it would be a fun thing to kind of switch things around, to end at a cliffhanger last episode, but to then begin with the battle in this episode, because this battle, episode 6, actually also closes off the storyline of the conflict between Daenerys, between the army of House Starkgaryen and the rebel army, because the entire rebel army has been, the base anyway, has been completely destroyed. The leader, Cadmus, has also been killed. With that, however, Podrick has died. He died while saving Jaime, so, I thought it would be nice to let Podrick go out like a hero, but also as a result of the huge battle and destruction, a forest fire has started, causing to destroy a huge part of the forest in the Reach and also many villages that were there. Of course, angering even more civilians and actually turning even more people against Daenerys. Again, in the second part of the episode, it was very character driven. Daenerys and Dario have a moment where they recall some fun memories, but also there's a conversation between Edric and Gendry where Edric really gets heartfelt, really starts to tell a heartfelt story about his past and how he has always been treated like some sort of property or misformed thing or something, because he was a bastard, and that all he has ever wanted was to actually prove himself, and that he wants to die a good man, and how he wants to be loved and love someone and earn that love in return, all that stuff. That was a really heartfelt moment. Jon is back in Winterfell. Little Sam is alright. It appeared not to be as severe as that, but again, he is in Winterfell. But in Winterfell, he meets his advisors again, and these advisors also tell him that he needs to step up, that he's also the leader of his house alongside with Daenerys, and that he needs to prevent his house from really getting a bad reputation, because that's what's happening right now. So Jon is eager to go back to King's Landing and try to set things right. It ends, however, on a very intense note with Daenerys trying to do something good. She tries to, go to the city, be amongst the people, but it ends up with a fight where her guards get killed off, and that she's nearly raped right before Brienne and Dario come in and save her. Of course, that was very intense, and it's something that we haven't seen, well, not in this kind of way. Um, so of course it ends where Brienne picks up Daenerys and they head back for Red Keep as Daenerys is crying. I think this you could see this as really the drop, the bucket's just floating over, if you can say it like that. So it was a very character-driven, intense episode. So pretty much just setting everything, preparing everything for the conflict that's about to come. All right, guys, that was episode 6, Sins of the Father. I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for episode 7. Bye.